Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to SM Advanced Forum. My name's Dom Robinson, one of the small cohort of hosts we have on the show, and we will be gossiping as we always do at this time on the first Thursday at 5 p.m. UK time, 12 p.m. Eastern, and 9 a.m. in the Pacific, or thereabouts, allowing for clocks to change and things. As we do every month, we'll be having a little roundup of the latest news and topics of hot interest in the streaming and online video space, with some studio guests. But before I introduce them, let me take you to the first of our hosts and our normal MC, Tim. Tim, are you there?
I am Dom, and today I'm sporting a lovely t-shirt about a video game from the 80s and 90s called Joust.
How very 8-bit of you.
Yeah, I introduced a friend of mine to it, and she's actually sort of getting into it. She's beating me, actually, at the game, so that's why I had to wear the t-shirt today.
I'm glad you're spending your time wisely, Tim. What else have you been up to apart from gaming?
Oh, let's see. Well, you know, in the last month, we did Stream Media West, and we'll talk a bit about that. I was able to do a number of really good interviews, including one with Sangeeta, who was on the show last month. Really enjoyed that. And when you have somebody on who has the title Distinguished Engineer in the Office of the CTO at Cisco Systems, you pay attention to what they say. And
exactly.
So that's been primary focus. On the Help Me stream, the not-for-profit side, I'm actually getting ready to go to Argentina next week. And I decided not to go this past week because the G20, there were a bunch of people from your country and my country congregating in Buenos Aires.
Good reason not to go there.
Yeah, the Secret Service might ask too many questions if I just randomly showed up.
So. Your passport number 007 would have been stopped at the border.
All right, so let's go on to Mark. Mark, as I understand, you actually are coming back from vacation. You hardly ever take downtime, but you did take some this time, didn't you?
It's true. It was, I mean, when your dad turns 75, you kind of have to make some time for it. So I took the folks on a cruise, and now I'm just desperately trying to dig myself out of this hole that I found myself into after 2 weeks away. But things are good. Things are good. Doing a lot of work with vertical video over the past couple of weeks. Still doing a lot of work for this company called Network in Los Angeles. Is doing an app-enabled endeavor that's a little bit like HQ Trivia. I think I've mentioned it before, but it's become a full-fledged thing. They're doing 2 to 3 shows a week, and I've been directing those. So it's been an interesting experience.
Nice, awesome. And
I'm just going to interrupt there a bit before you move on. So what's vertical video? Are you just not reversing the width and the height of the aspect ratio, or is there anything more complicated than that?
No, we're literally, you know, it's slightly more complicated than that. We're shooting 4K, we're doing a center cut and rotating it, and that's what goes out to the CDN. So everything, basically all of the the trickiest bit is the monitoring. All of the monitoring in the facility are, you know,
the wrong
monitors turned on their end.
Yeah.
So all of that needs to be manipulated as well. So if you want views that aren't part of what you're using in the show, that all has to be, you know, something has to be doing that cutting and flipping. So
curious.
yeah, it's it gets more complicated than it sounds.
Well, and we'll come back to that topic because I've got a couple questions too. But you reminded me with your dad's 75th birthday. Today's my dad's 74th birthday, so I want to say a shout out to him. Happy birthday. Now, Eric, you are recovering from Streaming Media West. You're in Wisconsin. Of course, you got snow.
Yes, we do.
Don't get that. We had some yesterday, and it, of course, brought everything to a standstill with half an inch. But it takes about a foot, I think.
About a foot, really, before things slow down. But, yeah, it's about 25 degrees right now. And so, of course, I have our publisher, Joel, who lives in Vancouver, calls it the Canadian tuxedo. But that's essentially what I'm doing today. But, yeah, recovering from Streaming Media West, which happened the second week of November. And Mark and Dom and Tim, you were all there. And so was Andy. Peggy, we missed you. But it was a great event. Roger Pantos from Apple gave a terrific kickoff session. We weren't allowed to call it a keynote, about delivering experiences in HLS. We introduced a couple of new tracks, one on video engineering, one on sports streaming. And overall, I think people were very happy with the event. And, you know, just as I'm recovering from Streaming Media West, I'm putting the program together for the streaming forum, which happens in London on February 26th. So I'm almost wrapped up with that, and hopefully we'll have that online and available in about a week and a half or 2 weeks.
And I'm really happy you're not doing that over Valentine's Day. It seems like for whatever reason, East falls around Mother's Day, West falls around Halloween. It's good to have it at the end of the month in February.
Don't tempt fate, Tim. It's the day before my daughter's birthday.
Right.
We have it. Well, and of course, last year we had a whole lot of snow kind of come through London, and it also shut things down. What was great.
And it was great to sort of experience the sort of, even though the Christmas decorations weren't out, sort of experience this Dickensian vision of London in the snow, which you rarely get to see, or at least I have never seen before.
Yeah, except my Dickensian version was they closed the underground and they put us all on double-decker buses to slide around town by Parliament. I felt like it was in the Harry Potter movie where the night bus comes through.
Right.
You were, and we were filming you. We just use a free extra. We just don't. It's a
my reaction shots had a lot of cringes as we came within centimeters of parked cars going down by Parliament, the back roads. So, all right. Anyway, we'll switch over to guests. And Peggy, we're going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of the things that you've been working on, and then we'll come back around to some of the questions. I think, Peggy, your microphone might be muted.
There we go. Now we're better, right? You can hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm Peggy Daw, and I do business as Mad Perspectives. I do independent consulting to companies in the media space and all along that kind of media value chain. So I've worked with companies that are way at the front end and doing editing, folks like Avid, companies like Grass Valley. I'm working right now with Amino Communications. So now looking at the complete opposite end of that value chain. I have a background in the IT space. I worked for Hewlett Packard for half my life, and the last third of that life was all around this space. And as IT was bleeding into content delivery, IPTV, and streaming media. And I left just to kind of get my work-life balance back. I didn't have any. And I am also the co-founder of a women's networking group called Women in Streaming Media. And we're there to kind of create a space for women to network together and learn from each other and find mentors and advance their careers in the streaming media space.
And it was really
got my finger into a bunch of different things.
Yeah, I know you missed Stream Media West, but it was awesome in the booth there when I was finished with the interviews for the first day. There was a meetup of the women in streaming media, and the first picture I was asked to take involved like 5 women, and by the time I got to the end, there were close to 20. We had 2 rows, and it was just really great to see the turnout at that particular event.
The meetups that we've had thus far, the women are just really excited. And, the first one was actually, we all met each other at NAB back in April. Okay. We had our first real formal meetup at IBC. And we've been talking and trying to get things organized. And we just did a coffee meetup, and it's thanks to folks like Jason Tebow and Eric Schumacher and whatnot that we were able to get this together. And it's just awesome. I mean, the level of interest is high. It's a global level of interest. It's not just in the United States. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us to really make it everything it can be. But, we're up for the task.
Is it geared toward people at multiple levels within organizations, not just CXOs, but also engineers?
No, it's any woman. It's any female working in this industry in any type of role. So it could be technology, sales, marketing, entry level, it could be students. And we would definitely want to start looking at creating a program to formalize an internship program. So it's like younger women who are still maybe at university who are thinking about streaming media as a career or some element of that we can create programs to help them meet the right people and get internships and check out whether that's what they really want to do with their life. I mean, is that the idea of an internship at the end of the day, is to say, hey, I think I'm interested in this, and here's a way to get your feet in the door and check it out and decide before you take that first job if that's really what you want to be doing.
And then if you do decide to take that job, then the mentorship piece kicks in as well.
Then the mentorship piece kicks in. And mentoring is a really interesting topic because I've been lucky in my career in the IT space. I had a lot of informal mentors. They weren't formal programs that said you're going to do X, Y, Z every week and whatnot. But there were people I learned I could reach out to and ask, advice from. But I also know there's a lot of women who felt that they didn't have those options and that they did not have that kind of access. They did not have people they felt that they could trust. And my mentors were both men and women. And it was great. It helped me grow as a professional. And I would like to see that for anybody. But I just feel like women have build some of their own barriers and say, oh, I can't do this. And I want to, at this point in my career, I want to be able to say to them, there's nothing you can't do. Let's figure out how to get from A to Z and get over all those hurdles.
And what's
real or imagined.
In the first world, we seem to have an issue where these tech industries are very male dominated. Excuse me. But when I go to India, I find sort of the reverse, that there are a lot of women engineers, there are a lot of women in computer science.
Yeah.
And so you see those trends, and it's even looking globally for those kinds of trends as well, to figure out how we can not necessarily bring to parity or go beyond parity, but ultimately find the right person for the right role and figure out how to mentor that
right
into those roles. So.
Well, I would argue that here in the United States, that there was I don't have any data, right, but this is just gut, is that there was a lot of opening up in the technology industry towards women, and then it started reversing itself. And I don't really quite know what caused that to happen. But I can just say based on my HP career, I didn't feel like I was facing any kind of barriers until the early part of the 2000s. And I could see and I could feel the reversal of openness towards women in any role. And maybe that was because I was rising up in the organization as well. But it was one of those, I was like, this is the battles, the bullying that goes on is just astounding. And I know that what I felt is microscopic as compared to the stories I've read about, Wall Street and places like that. I mean, microscopic in comparison, but it's there. And why does it need to be there? I feel like I'm an accidental feminist because I never thought about it. I grew up in a family where I was told I could do and be anything I want. But here I am now in the 2000s, and all of a sudden I feel like, oh my gosh, I really need to stand up. So.
Well, and I think generationally too, that's been an issue where the generation that didn't have to fight for it comes along and sort of expects it, but expects it without feeling like they have to confront that level of bias. And when I say not to parity, what I ultimately mean there is, demographically speaking, we're essentially split, male and female. I don't think it makes sense to push a quota agenda necessarily, but I absolutely think it makes sense to do things like double blinds for interviews so that you're not biased to gender, to race, religion, etc.
And then in salary parity, I know I wasn't paid the same as my male counterparts.
Which completely is wrong.
Which is completely wrong. Absolutely. So I can kind of sit there and say, so here, it's all these little things that contributed to me saying, look, I've learned a lot working at my life at HP. So I'm going to leave and I'm going to go independent and I'm going to get my work-life balance back and I'm going to choose who my clients are and I'm going to work in a space that excites me. And I'm going to help them with all their marketing and go-to-market strategies and partnerships and things like that and help them be wildly successful.
And then get to charge whatever you want to, which means you don't have
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
All right, good deal. Andy, you, as I understand, have been bouncing up and down the West Coast. You'll find it ironic, having been in the Raleigh-Durham area, that yesterday, we had half an inch of snow here in Tennessee, and everything came to a standstill, because I know that whole thing.
I know that well, absolutely.
And you've escaped to the Northwest. So tell us what you're doing.
Well, so I these days I work at Microsoft. I'm a principal engineer that focuses on media infrastructure projects, and I work out of a group called Commercial Software Engineering. We don't have any products at Microsoft. We're the partner team that goes out and works with all of the big companies that want to find ways to work with Microsoft and want to work better with it and understand how to move workloads over to Azure or other pieces of it. So I get to just work on cool big media projects kind of all day, which is great.
And isn't that you had done quite a bit of independent consulting for a while
Yes.
in Microsoft Studios? So is it essentially a continuation of that and a more formalized?
Sort of. I mean, I've been doing this for. I did startups for a number of years, probably 15 before I joined Microsoft, and then after my last startup, I was sort of between things. Literally, this was NAB of 2012. I ran into a buddy who was consulting at Microsoft and said, we're getting ready to start this big project to bring media applications to the Xbox, and it's a good fit for your talents. Why don't you come do that for a year? And I did it for a year, and then I did it for one more year, and then in the middle of my third year contract, I got offered a full-time job. So I kind of think of myself as having a 2.5-year job interview. And I
internship, to use Peggy.
Exactly. And I did that. I did the Xbox role until I was hired full-time, and then they sort of lifted our whole team and moved it over. That was sort of the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015. They had sort of that big reorg of Microsoft where they aligned all of the engineering teams and all the other pieces together. And so they pulled all of these groups together that were working with partners and put us in the evangelism area, and continued to call us an evangelist for a while, but now we're just the engineering team. And it's funny that group, when I joined it, was I think about 75 or 80 people, and at last count we're over 800 now. And we're also we're the most gender and racially diverse group of engineers at Microsoft.
Bravo.
So you're the sole reason that Microsoft is more valuable than Apple.
I somehow suspect that I am not the reason, but I am happy to come along. I would say it's definitely a good time to work at Microsoft for sure. It's the culture has totally changed from the Ballmer days, I think, and it's just it's an interesting place to work. Lots of cool projects.
And as you know, a number of our colleagues that we've known who had left Microsoft during the Ballmer days are now back at Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Knowlton,
David Syed is back. Yep.
Right, and it's just fascinating to me to see them leave, go do startups, and then come back to something that's in their backyard because they continued to live there in Redmond, Seattle, and ultimately have something fun to come back to. So that's what's impressed me about Microsoft in the last couple of years, is it feels like once they released the stranglehold on the things that they had used as their sole revenue sources, suddenly they got to a model where they could make revenue across the board. And I think that's been really important.
Yeah, I think there's been a big fundamental shift of like there really is a focus from Satya down to empower our partners and customers in a better way. It's less about pushing the first party products or creating something that we then have to go sell to people. It's more about how do we create solutions that are going to be appealing and interesting to them that we can go work on. And that's a total change, and that's the space I like working in.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to kick it back to Dom, who seems to be the conference attendee champion among us to give a quick recap on a couple conferences.
I don't know that that's entirely true, actually. I don't know if it's worth starting there, because 2 years ago I did 16 conferences. Last year I did 8. This year I did 6, because more and more conferences are eclipsing onto the same dates. Not because they've stopped, and in fact, if anything, I can see new conferences on the horizon that are quite interesting. But many conferences over the last 2 years seem to have eclipsed onto the same dates. So actually, travel this year has been much easier. But it's been IBC and the Streaming Media conferences, and Content Delivery World is my 6th this year.
So tell me about CDW, because that's something that those of us who are over here don't tend to pay that much attention to.
We've done a clever thing without Eric and the Informer crew knowing, but JT, Jason Tebow, who's been on here before, and I both got asked separately to do some programming and hosting for separately, in JT's case, the Content Delivery Summit, which is on the Monday of Streaming Media East each year. And in my case, Content Delivery World, which I've been in various, it's been amalgamated from several other conferences, but in one guise or another, I've been chairing that for about 8 years. We've done we're maintaining some consistency of topics between the events, actually, rather cunningly, just by pushing various panels and so on forward. CDW this year was in the Inmarsat building in London about 10 days ago. It was quite well attended. I'd have said there was probably it was co-located with OTT World. That's too many T's. OTT TV World, which was just across the hallway. A lot more focused on user experience, user side stuff than CDW, which is a lot more about infrastructure, core networking, core encoding strategies, and how to deal with that aspect of video. Not only video, there were other techs that were being brought in. There was some interesting presentations on advertising from Google and Sky, and we also kind of broke the mold. Eric will acknowledge this, but I've been pushing for years that we actually get a little bit more policy debate into these conferences, because they're good debates, they're meaty debates when you start talking about policy. And I got the guy, Nick Landsman, who started the Internet Service Providers Association in the mid-90s, to come and moderate the panel. And he actually sort of pulled a fast one and got me to sit on the panel, which was a bit unexpected. But he got me and James Blessing, who's been doing, he's done some CDN work, but he's also been on the board of ISPA, and he's done lots and lots of stuff, sort of at peering level and transit level in the various exchanges around the UK. And we also sat down with John Enzer, who's the senior partner at what's now CMS, but most people would have heard of, in that circle, would have heard of as Olswang, which is the legal firm that created the multimedia category in the Legal 500. So he was the man behind that. So he's one of the great granddaddies of multimedia law, who I've known since the mid-90s. And we sort of were both got to know each other through the formation of the Internet Webcasters Association in the mid-90s, which over here was probably had more niche impact in some very, very specific areas, wasn't as well known as the US IWA, which was big because of the Napster interactions with the RIA and so on. But we talked about how CDNs and big content delivery networks have always stuck their head under the duvet when it comes to policy issues, and always thought that's something that the consumer networks or someone else is going to deal with. And we got stuck into things like Article 13 and changes to how the World Symposium of Information Services is restructuring or at least attempting to restructure some of the ITU laws, which could have a fundamental change on how telecoms operators provide the internet per se. And those are ongoing things. So I think it was good to expose those discussions to 50, 100, 150 people from the core network architecture community, because I think a lot of them walked out realizing that they actually are probably more in the crosshairs of people who see wealthy companies making a lot of money out of video delivery online, and therefore infinitely liable for anything that they can throw at them in terms of monetary accusations, in terms of hiring lawyers and so on. So that was quite an interesting one. Sorry.
Before we jump on to Streaming Media West or the other ones, I wanted to actually piggyback on something you said. First of all, in the States, we had the Open Video Conference for a couple of years, which essentially was a digital haves and have-nots, and then looked at digital law. That isn't something that we have talked about a lot here in the States. And I think you bring up a really interesting point, which is, as the companies that we know in this space grow, especially as OTT delivery grows, will those companies then become much more susceptible to legal harassment, so to speak?
Well, exactly. It's just like the patent trolls. You have policy trolls. That's exactly the same sort of motivation. Somebody starts with an accusation, somebody else defends it, and the lawyers charge in and make a load of money. And at the moment, with everybody saying that video is going to be 70% of telecoms networks traffic, and telecoms networks being seen as, probably up there after oil and electricity as being some of the major utility providers, they're sitting targets for discovering that they're liable for the conduit of content that they didn't think they were liable for, and so on. And so yeah, I think we're far. You can see it's taken years to sort the music industry out. I don't think we've even started sorting the video industry out in many ways. So.
And let's use that as a segue into a topic that a number of us talked about before the show, which is advertising. Eric, I'm going to let you sort of pick that up, and then I know Peggy had some insights into it as well. But what was it, Eric, that caught your attention about sort of these models of advertising on-demand subscription services?
Well, excuse me, we ran a story on streamingmedia.com yesterday. We actually picked it up from Variety. And it's a story that I think points to, aside from being on its face a bad idea, it points to perhaps deeper issues in the ad-supported content world. And that's that Hulu and AT&T have both said that they plan to show ads when viewers pause content. So not only will you be interrupted with advertising when the show takes a natural break in the ad breaks that are purchased and sold, but when you pause a show to go get a cup of coffee, to take a phone call, to answer an email, whatever it is the case might be, there's going to be an ad playing. At least that's what Hulu and AT&T are planning. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember Keith Olbermann's show on MSNBC, but each episode he would have a segment called "The Worst Person in the World." I think this qualifies for perhaps the worst idea in the world in terms of how invasive this is going to be to those services customers. Now, they wouldn't be doing it.
But it means that it's not about the customers anymore, right? It's only about those companies' desire to make more money, because you're already paying for a subscription. If you're already paying for a subscription and you decide to pause what you're watching, that's a subscriber choice. It's not like the old world where in TV, and you had a break. They defined when the breaks were. They defined what the advertising was going to be. And if you go way back to the golden age of TV back in the 50s, right? They would you'd have like Sid Caesar talking about the product that was the ad. That was the ad at the end of the day. But again, that was them. That was the programmers making that choice to do that, because we don't pay a fee here in the United States to have a TV. In the UK, you pay a fee. But here we don't. And I feel like this whole idea from AT&T and Hulu is just all about more money in their pockets. I just find it very intrusive, and I would not subscribe to their services because of it.
So it's interesting, coming from a country where we are culturally strongly disposed against advertising because of the luxury of the BBC for many years. I remember when Sky launched, and I hadn't been around to anyone's house with a Sky subscription, being really quite shocked that they were paying and still being advertised to. I just found that the whole point of paying was to not get advertised to. That was the whole point of it. So to be paying, and then if I started seeing adverts in my Netflix feed, I would be. I think you guys are probably more disposed to accepting that, but I would be right. End of subscription. I've had enough of that. That's one of the great values is no adverts.
I won't subscribe to Hulu precisely for that, but isn't there even a tiered model within some of those companies that says if you pay this much extra instead of getting sort of the 4K version, you get the commercial free?
Yeah, there is, and of course, if you're paying for, let's say, a Hulu Live subscription as a replacement for traditional broadcast or cable or satellite, then you're sort of predisposed to saying, okay, had I been paying for cable, I would have been getting ads in these shows anyway. I'm okay in my live Hulu feed getting some ads. But, when you start talking. But
still, when you pause it, that's that's rough business.
Because the reason you're pausing it is, it could be anything. It could be that the baby's crying. It could be that you need a bio break. It could be, if you're not pausing to get fed an ad.
I still haven't even come to grips with Netflix insisting on previewing everything that I hover over for a couple of seconds in their UI. So I definitely don't want this either. It's one of those things where technology has enabled it, but we definitely don't necessarily need it, nor do we want it. And I suspect that it will end up being one of those experiments that gets tried and not loved and may get moved on.
Like the streaming media 101, we need and drop that in a box.
Andy, unfortunately, in our industry, the experiments that get tried and nobody likes get adopted. Things like data caps on your cable modem, bad idea. seems to still be sticking around.
It does stick around, but at least there are a couple of other options out there now. I recently just switched from a cable data capped modem to a fiber connection at my house that is uncapped.
There you go. But that's the thing. So we all have choices to make, don't we? So we can make the choice about, you know, who we're going to subscribe to and how we want to consume that content, you know, and that's what's been going on. This is the whole point of cord cutting, isn't it? Saying, I don't want to pay all that money anymore to have channels I don't care about.
So
that's really what it boils down to.
Subscription fatigue, because while it's true we're cutting the cord to save money and for things we don't want, I know a number of people who have multiple accounts. They'll have a Hulu account, they'll have an Amazon Prime account, arguably on Prime, they're getting some other benefit besides video. They'll have a Netflix account, and they don't know where content is going to be played. And now we've got talk about, I think, Peggy, you had identified an article about content being pulled back by Warner, maybe, and some of these others. Then we're faced with more subscriptions as opposed to fewer. So is there a subscription fatigue level that people will reach where they want to cut the cord on the cord?
So I think this comes down to like kind of that basic concept, right? Is that everybody has said they've wanted a la carte, you know, TV, right, for a long time. But when you start breaking it down and then you start adding it back up again, you get to the same amount of money that you're paying to your cable company anyway.
Precisely.
Right. So there's that aspect of it. But I think this aspect, you know, from Warner Media, and I know that Mark has some comments on this as well, is that they're saying, okay, our content is our content. So hello, walled gardens. Don't we just all love walled gardens? You're forced to say, if I want to watch this, I got to subscribe over here. And if I want to watch something else, I have to go subscribe over here. So you get to that subscriber fatigue. But I'm just like, well, then why don't they just do like the release windows like we used to have in movies? Yeah, we're going to have a release movie, and it's going to be, you know, of course, a lot of this has changed, but we're going to have the US, and then we're going to have international, and we're going to have Asia, and then we're going to go to paid cable, then we're going to go to, you know, free cable and whatnot. You can do the same thing. These guys are all in it for the money at the end of the day. How much money can they make off of a media asset? So you put up too many walls, you're not going to make the money you think you should make.
Well, I think to a certain extent, I think we're starting to see some walls drop. We were talking a couple months ago on this very are we calling this a podcast, Tom?
Well, I don't know.
Whatever this is, we were talking on whatever this is. Right. About properties like CBS All Access, where you've got a really limited amount of original content and exclusive content for, you know, that carries the same kind of subscription rate as, you know, a Hulu or a Netflix. And I think those are on the more ridiculous side of the scale. And then you've got this new product that's coming out next year from Warner that is going to consolidate what is now HBO Now with a number of other Turner and Warner properties, and create a more robust offering. And I think that's where we're going in the face of things like Disney Plus coming out and creating a huge offering with all of the Disney properties, all of the Marvel properties, all of the Lucas properties, et cetera. I think these other, you know, content owners are going to need to consolidate to compete. Thoughts?
I think one of the elements that going back slightly to the earlier comment about subscription fatigue, I totally agree on the fact that we've got way more subscriptions, but one of the things that we've inherited in the sort of internet age of subscriptions is that we're not getting locked in on contracts the way that we were, and it's much easier to turn them on and off rapidly. In fact, Hulu has a whole piece in their management of your account where you can pause your subscription for, I think, up to 3 months at a time. So if you're like going on, I guess, vacation, or you just decide you don't want to watch it, you just don't get, you know, you basically just turn it off, and then it just comes back whenever you want to set it up. And it's the same with like CBS. I wanted to see Star Trek Discovery last year when it came out. I subscribed to it while it was on. I wasn't going to watch anything else on CBS when it was done, so I turned that right off. And January, it's getting ready to come back, and so I'll turn it on. So I think.
Come on, you don't want to watch reruns of Young Sheldon? Come on, man.
You know what? I'm okay missing it. But I guess that's, you know, like the next disruption we're going to have is some sort of like management subscription service out there that tells that I can put all of my accounts into and the shows I watch, and at some point it can just intelligently subscribe and unsubscribe me as needed.
Hey, so is
all
that
the
going to be
various
the
things.
benefit of these streaming boxes that they're coming out with, that both Comcast and AT&T, so they're going to have streaming boxes to differentiate from a regular linear set-top box? Maybe they'll help you manage all your subscriptions. Sorry, I'm being facetious.
You never know.
So sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's an interesting point. I mean, one of the models we've had is there were a number of sites that came up that allowed you to say, type in the name of a movie and figure out which service it was streaming on. What you're saying essentially,
Google will do that for you now, by the way. I just noticed this yesterday.
Yeah, and that's awesome because we need it integrated to the level of, you're not saying to yourself, I want to watch such and such, I wonder where it's playing. You're saying, I want to watch such and such, and then you're annoyed when your service doesn't provide it.
Right.
Essentially, what I hear you saying, Andy, is almost a machine learning model that would say, we've noticed you've watched this type of content across these 3 services that you have, but you're watching 10% of it on Hulu. Maybe it's time to pause your Hulu account. And then conversely, send that information back to Hulu, disaggregated, that says, of subscribers who also have Netflix and Prime, these are or YouTube TV, this is the percentage of content that they're actually watching on your service, for them to, and especially if you could say categorically, here are the categories they're watching, that would allow Hulu or other companies, as they go to make the bids for content, to at least bid more savvy.
So Tim, I've got a take on it. There is always the famous adage that content's king. Andy's former boss came up with that, I think. But I'm not actually completely convinced in that, and I think the proof of that, of any counter argument, is that I tend to limit myself to. I view services quite discreetly. You know, iTunes is not Spotify. iTunes is where I go to buy music because I want a downloadable copy. I don't use Apple Music. I use Spotify just because I would, and that's exactly the point. I wouldn't have both. I'm accessible to, and I turn the model on its head. I am accessible to the music licensors through Spotify. If they want to get to my money, they get to me through Spotify. If I want live streaming, linear streaming content, I'm not watching the free iPlayer stuff. Then, if it was available here in the UK, I might adopt. I suppose I could adopt now. What do you call it, Now TV, or if I was in the States, I might adopt Hulu, but it's for the live linear. And then again, there's freemium. My platform of choice is YouTube. The only reason I have 2 snackable video, I've got SVOD with Netflix. The only reason I've got Prime is not. I don't know how many people actually buy Prime for their video. I think it's just because it comes in with the Prime account that it's there. It's almost like a loss-led thing in the Amazon case. I don't know, but I limit myself. So if somebody said it's no longer on Netflix, I'd look at that like the content licensor's loss, not I can't get the piece of content I want. I don't go looking over the wall, which I think the content providers have got it into their heads that if I take all my Star Wars movies off Netflix and put it on a different subscription service, then it will make everybody move to my service. But from my perspective, it's like, well, sod it, I just won't watch Star Wars anymore, or I'll buy it off.
No, or you might do what Andy just said, and you might say, okay, I'm going to binge on Star Wars for the month of January. I'm going to watch every piece of Star Wars content. I'm going to watch it for a month. I'm going to get it out of my system, and maybe I'm going to come back in July and watch it again.
The only counter argument
I'm not going to.
Is mobile phone tariffing. People don't hop tariffs as freely as the market says that they should, because it's just inconvenient to do so. You just don't want to go and find that, close my account, suspend my account, move over to Netflix, open up a new account. Right. It's just really inconvenient. So I think I try to turn it on its head and say it's inconvenient for Disney that they won't be able to reach me anymore. I won't be a growing part of their fan base, and my family won't grow up with Disney. Well, tough to Disney.
Oh, no,
I totally get what you're saying, Dom. I guess what I'm saying is I almost want like a credit card statement of all of the streaming media services I apply to, and at the end of the month I want to see, here's the ones I watched. Oh, I didn't watch anything on Prime. Maybe I want to pause that one. I don't know. And come back to it. So that's I think there's opportunity out there.
They could just extend the CDN model to us and just charge us by gigabyte. That would really sort the market out.
I have a question for you, Dom. If it's Star Wars content that you're talking about, if it's Lucas content that you're talking about, that's one thing. But if it's Disney Plus and it's Lucas and Disney and Marvel and Muppets and whatever, and you're the average parent of a school-aged kid, can you really give that up? Is that something?
The question is, do I want to bring my kids up with it? Because Netflix will have its choice of accessible content.
And
my kids haven't really grown up with that stuff. So
but is it what the kid? Mark's point is it what your kids want to watch? Is it your family? When you think about kids in particular, they will watch the same thing over and over and over and over and over, right?
And if they like that, if they were like that, they'll buy a DVD.
And they need to be culturally relevant. They want to watch what their friends are watching.
Yeah. Except there's Dom's counter argument, which is the people who absolutely don't want to watch that, therefore won't have to worry about exposing their kids to it on Netflix. That's ultimately sort of what I hear you saying.
Hook them on the brand early. You know, if they don't know about the brand, they'll discover it later in life, and if they want to make their own choice to switch, fine. But I think it's about resisting that.
But it's not. But my argument would be in that case, it's not that much later in life. It's not. It's going to be before they have their own monetary revenue stream. It's going to be when
they're going to be cleaning the car. They're going to be cleaning the car more often than.
Oh, I see.
So here's what's interesting about that, Peggy, and this is something that we talked about a couple episodes back. We have this cultural model of where we used to have the water cooler. So everybody would watch the show on CBS, NBC, ABC, and you'd go in the next morning and talk about it. Now, because a lot of us, especially those of us in the industry, to use on demand to consume, Mark may be watching all the Marvel stuff, binge watching, straight through to Christmas, and then he'll switch to Die Hard. A whole other story.
Right.
But ultimately, he's doing that while Dom's over here watching My Little Pony. And Eric is over here watching. Outed.
I knew you were a brony. It's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
just look at you for Christmas, Tim. Read between the lines.
Exactly. Here we go. But ultimately, what we have is no longer the water cooler model. And I think it's interesting because we can have this conversation. Mark, I think Disney Plus may be one of the few that can pull it off, not because they have Disney, but because they have Marvel, because they have Star Wars, and heaven help us, if they own Star Trek or something like that. So you have, that is a critical mass of content. I think they can do it, but I think to Dom's point, there are going to be very few others that will pull stuff in-house that will see a rise in revenue as opposed to a potential fall in revenue.
I agree, which is why I think consolidation is the key to survival in this new age of Disney Plus, and I think that's where Warner's going with their product. They've eliminated a lot of their smaller niche streaming properties like Super Deluxe. They just killed Super Deluxe a month ago, and they're pulling in what they have left, along with all of the Turner stuff, along with HBO Now, and they're trying to create a compelling offering. Who else can do it besides Disney and Warner? I don't know, but I think that's the key.
I don't think that the video industry's learned enough from the music industry. The music industry, around about the sort of time it was shaken up, not just by Napster, but more importantly, probably by iTunes, the music industry was still in this sort of catharsis of trying to fragment, and the rights owners were trying to fragment because they saw that, it's a mercantilism. The more borders we can put up, the more we can charge. So let's just fragment. And then they learned that didn't work because the subscribers didn't follow. They just lost interest. And I think the video industry is trying it again because it cyclically does try to create walled gardens, cyclically does try to create, drag that audience back in. And they'll soon learn that by fragmenting the market, you actually just piss the customer off and they walk. And I think they're counterintuitively making it harder for people to find content, which will just make them pirate the content. That's
I want to go back to something that Andy said, where you're talking about turning it off and turning it on, which I think is brilliant if there's an automation or machine learning model. I don't know if you remember way back when HBO announced HBO Go at the Streaming Media East conference. This was probably, Eric, 10 years ago? And what he said at that point when he was asked whether they would provide that as a service, standalone, as opposed to tied to somebody who had a cable subscription, was no. The reason he wasn't going to do it was he wanted people to watch on demand, to binge watch on demand in between series that were on HBO. So the end of The Sopranos, somebody might go back and watch Deadwood. And the idea was to keep them engaged for a couple months until the next big thing came out on the cable provider. Are we in a model with on demand that once we binge watch something, we're more likely to steer away from the on demand service? Or is there a model like HBO's where ultimately we could tie live linear episodics in the binge watching in between? And I'm talking about everybody, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think there, you know, while I'm saying that I think there's an opportunity to pause the accounts. I think that's the goal of these guys is to keep things, keep you engaged and keep something relevant for you to watch. So that's the curation part of their job, to sort of keep you there. It's not only the new big tentpole, it's not the new Game of Thrones. It's sort of what comes on, or what interesting older content can we pull into that's relevant and is in the same wheelhouse.
And so for you, you didn't find compelling content to go watch after the particular show that you wanted to see.
It's hit or miss. Again, it really depends on the service. A good example was recently I got pulled into Homecoming on Amazon Prime. Loved it. Was super great. I'd been a fan of Mr. Robot, so you know, when I heard that it was coming, I was excited to see it. And in the process of watching that, I found sort of 2 or 3 other things that were in the service. I'd totally forgotten Man in the High Castle to come out again, and I had watched all the other seasons, and I was like, oh yeah, I just there's
Firefly so many times, right?
Yeah. And so I was like, well, let's kick right onto that. And then I found several others, but then I also found several others that was like, oh, it's good to know these are here, but at the same time, I don't need to watch them right now. I pre-booked my holiday watching. I was like, this is something I'll watch the week of Christmas when I'm not doing anything else. So there's definitely peaks and valleys in the sort of the content that you're going to find. And I think the content, you know, it's going to end up evolving over time with these. You know, to Mark's point, we're in this like contraction period right now where everybody's siloing their services, and Warner's got big announcements that are coming. Disney obviously has big plans, and so of course they're pulling back in content because they have these big splashes that they want to make. Realistically, in a couple of years, they're going to have to find middle ground where they still do business with these other services, and we'll end up seeing some content licensed back out. I think it's just part of the natural process of our ecosystem and the way that it works. So it'll keep going in and out like this forever. I mean, I don't see that changing.
Eric, what's your take?
You know, really only to echo what's already been said. I mean, I think you're right that this, you know, very few content owners have the critical mass that a Disney does. When you look at subscription fatigue, I think it's realistic to expect that many people will have perhaps 3 subscriptions, one to a live linear streaming service like Hulu Live or DirecTV Now or Sling TV, one to Amazon Prime because it comes with all these other benefits. You know, like you said, most people are subscribing to Prime for the free shipping and other benefits first, and oh, it's got video. On the other hand, that's the one of these services that you can't just turn on and turn off. You pay for a year in advance and you get the whole year. You know, and then an on-demand service, most likely Netflix. But I do feel like consumers are reaching that subscription fatigue point. And so, you know, I think we're reaching a critical mass overall of the number of services. I mean, even one of the Fox executives at the 2017 IBC was already talking about the kind of consolidation or reconsolidation, reaggregation of content that Mark had mentioned earlier. So I think we will start to see that.
So one other question.
Do you think a Disney, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you think a Disney or a Warner can get the same kind of market penetration that Netflix has? I mean, when, you know, Netflix has really good adoption at this point, right?
I definitely don't think it's going to be possible outside the States. I think they will. I think it's possible inside the States, but I don't think it's going to be possible around the rest of the world. I think they've got one of the most enormous subscriber bases globally. And that's
right.
that's a complex market. Localizing, a friend of mine does the localization of content for Netflix. It's such a massive job, and it's so specific to the platform that it's going to take a while for anyone else to develop that workflow. It's not an easy thing to do.
But what happens to that subscriber base? What happens to that penetration rate for Netflix when they have no, licensing deals with larger content creators, and when they've diluted their original content brand by creating, 400 original movies a month, to where Netflix just becomes this kind of unnecessary thing?
Yeah, that's a point too. Yeah.
I see it flipping totally the other way, where Netflix is unnecessary in 5 years, and it's all about Disney Plus and Warner Media and these larger, where you can actually get the content you want to watch.
I think it's going to depend on the quality of those originals. If Netflix is investing well in locally UK produced, locally French produced content, or further afield, Africa's a hot area at the moment.
Very, very hot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And if that investment goes well, and they come up with local content that people in local communities can watch and feel like it's part of their culture, rather than just watching East Coast, West Coast American culture, that's going to make a big difference, because that's not been done yet well.
And Mark, I think one of the things that people sit down to do, unless they're looking for a specific thing, they sit down and say, I've got 2 hours, what can I watch? And it may be that you're watching something slightly mediocre on Netflix that's either a license that they bought inexpensively, or one of their original pieces of content. But at the end of the day, unless it's a large aggregation like Disney with Marvel and Lucas and the Disney and Pixar properties, I don't see that they'll sort of go, oh, I got to drop Netflix because there's nothing to watch. The reason the cable companies have done phenomenally well with adding channels, at least up to the last couple of years with cord cutting, was there was always, quote unquote, something on to watch when you had your prime time that you were going to sit down and view content.
Right, and I think, at least in the case of Disney Plus, that's what they're trying to do. They've optioned all of this original content, these original series based on Marvel and Disney properties, et cetera, that they're creating. And I think there's a chance that it may get to the point where you get to the end of the month and you are looking at that credit card bill. That would be a lovely thing, Andy, if there were such a thing, and you're looking at your expenses that you're spending on streaming services, and you say, well, I would really like Disney Plus. Let's see if I can afford it. Do I watch anything on Netflix anymore? Not really. None of their content's really all that great. I think I'm just going to drop Netflix and go with Disney Plus. I think that's perhaps a logical thing that might happen over the next few years.
I think I have my next startup.
There we go. And I really like on the windowing, because if we think back to the Blockbuster windowing and the HBO windowing, that really was what defined the market. And I know we're trying to get away from it, but ultimately, if we've got a whole bunch of services out there, it lets Disney and Warner save face by doing their own. And people who are diehard Marvel or Lucas fans will watch that content. But for the rest of us, yeah, we can wait 5 or 6 weeks to watch.
That's right.
So as we wrap up here, we've got 7 minutes. Let's go back real quick to Streaming Media West. Dom, you were starting to go into that, and I cut you off, and we went off this direction. What was your take on Streaming Media West, and Mark and Andy as well?
Still my favorite conference of the year, but I think that's largely environmental, as much as obviously programming. But yeah, no, it was great event. It seemed to be really good attendance. I actually haven't had the debrief from Eric, but I presume it was well attended, because it seemed that way, and it seems to be. It seems to have new lifeblood in it, old chap. I think you did a good job of programming it.
Thank you. I'm still waiting for the debrief on it. So once I have that, I can share that.
Of course, I was paid to the interview booth the whole time, and saw some of you as you came by. But there really was a lot of excitement that I sensed. Andy, what's your take?
Like Dom, it continues to be sort of one of my favorites of the year. It's outside of NAB and IBC, it's definitely the one that I always make sure I go to. every year. I mean, it's convenient because it's also West Coast, so that's easy. It is nice to get a little vitamin D in November. I don't mind that part of it. But honestly, it's always a good set of conversations as well. And half the time it's the things that we talk about over drinks at the end of the day that are as fascinating as the things that happen in the panels themselves. So it's a great connection, and it's a great place to. I've encouraged more and more of my colleagues to go and participate and get involved.
And Eric, anything like Pantos that you can have for East Forum, etc. That was phenomenal school.
That was a great that was like my favorite keynote of like several of the last several years. It was so worthwhile.
Well, and it's interesting because we've typically stayed away from fairly technical keynotes. Just because, and I know, just because we want to make sure that the keynotes are of interest to everyone. But I think it's also time that we embrace that it's a technical conference. We have mostly a technical audience. And certainly if it's Apple talking about HLS, that's going to be of interest to even the non-tech folks because it's Apple talking about HLS.
Yep.
I think also the companies have grown. I think, where 5 years ago you had 3 sales guys and 2 engineers. Now you've got 3 sales guys and 7 very busy engineers. And I think that dynamic's changed. I think it seemed at all the content delivery world sessions, it was the really deep technical ones that had the standing room only. It was the latency one was just absolutely rammed for some reason. Well, it's not that surprising. Latency is one of the topics of the year, but people are not afraid to get there to go into bits and bytes. I think those are the influences on the business decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The key influences.
And from a live streaming standpoint, there aren't that many shows that really focus on live streaming. I know that's a big area that Mark's in. The rest of us tend to be more, sort of on the on-demand stuff. Mark, what was your sort of sense with just technical discussions around live streaming or event streaming as opposed to just the on-demand content stuff?
So I was at the show for a grand total of like 6 hours, 2 of which were spent having very delicious cocktails at Water Table. That's it. No, the panel that I spoke on was probably the most interesting discussion I had all day. It was about IP in live streaming and specific to sports, and it turned into an hour-long discussion about NewTek's NDI standard. And how it's, I thought I was going to be the NDI guy talking to a bunch of SMPTE 2022 guys, who work for NFL Network and ESPN and yada yada. It turned into a room full of people, all of whom use NDI and are just starting to kind of, explore what can be done with it and that sort of thing. So it was interesting to talk about that. NDI has, for example, has been the only way we could have done the 4K stuff that we're doing for this vertical app-enabled thing that I've been working on. Without NDI, we'd have SDI quad link going all over this facility, and it would be a little bit ridiculous. But
and does that mean that NDI, essentially like HLS, becomes sort of a de facto standard because it's being adopted? It's out there, it works, and being adopted, even though it's not an industry standard, so to speak.
Exactly, because they made it open. They didn't wait for SMPTE, and it's just going to get adopted. And at some point, it'll be there will be devices, I think, that are 2022 and NDI compatible, and they will work that way. That standard will get will get combined in some way, I think, and I think that was the general consensus among the group. But right now, I think it is absolutely the de facto standard. Unfortunately, that puts the development of it squarely in the hands of NewTek, and they do have their hands full right now. So that
Andrew Cross is brilliant, from the standpoint of the understanding of this technology, but he also has a business to run now that he's been promoted into that role as well. So you're right. It ultimately does become part of the bottleneck is NewTek for the success.
Absolutely. There's a number of independent developers right now that are working on NDI technologies and that are driving the standard forward, but it all really, at the end of the day, has to loop back to NewTek. So I think, they need to open it.
To push it into a standard, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
All right, Dom, we're going to hand it back to you because we are at the top of the hour, and you get the final word, apparently.
Well, we are indeed. I was just looking at the little list of topics that we might cover, and we're on number 1.
We could,
I think we did really well there. So, guys, if you tuned in expecting to hear a full roundup, well, you've had an in-depth discussion about advertising and rights, so in the OTT space. So, I think that was a remarkably good discussion. I'd like to say a huge thanks to both our guests, Peggy. If you're out there, I can't switch the camera. You have to talk to say goodbye. There we go. Andy,
see you guys.
You rest up and recover from your travels. And Eric, are you still on there? Give us a wave. Goodbye.
Here. Goodbye.
Cool.
So long. Thanks for showing up.
And Mark, you're out there somewhere.
Goodbye, sir. Until next time.
Brilliant. And Tim.
I'm headed to springtime in Argentina in a couple of days. So
okay, you're going on the 6-month DVR wind back there. So we are back some frighteningly early period, like the 3rd of, is it the 3rd of January? Yeah, it's the 3rd of January. So I expect to see you all picking bits of mince pie and party string out of your hair and things early in the new year. And I'll probably catch up with some of you in the in-between period. Next month, before I've got to remember to see this because I never remember to see this. Next month we have got Mark Simontalski and Alicia Pritchett, who's the WSM representative next month. And oh, there you go, that professionally cut to Peggy, as I mentioned, WSM, which is good. So that all seems to be working. So do join us for that, and I'm sure there'll be some talk about SRT because Mark's rather up on SRT, and Alicia will be talking about CDN stuff. Right, that's enough. We've had a good time. Hope you have, and I look forward to seeing you in January. Have a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and if I can find the stop button, we'll see you next time.